Okay. I know this is the last days of the COP, and things are either getting very slow or very tense. But I would really appreciate that we all are here for this session. This session is hosted by the Presidential Climate Change Commission, which is an independent statutory body, multi-stakeholder body established by the President around 2020. The purpose of establishing this body was more of to oversee, facilitate, and establish a transition towards a low carbon, a low emissions and climate resilient economy. There has been a large amount of focus on investment planning for the just energy transitions, but comparatively little emphasis on investment in adaptation and resilience. The motivation for such investments is now growing as countries grapple with impacts and costs associated with loss and damage. This session will examine the investment case for adaptation and resilience linked to broader considerations of a just transition and a diversified economic development. This session will also explore methodologies for quantification of costs and investment planning in relation to food security, water, and the built environment. The session will discuss the early thinking towards the development of the Just Adaptation and Resilience Investment Plan. I would like to introduce Ms. Boitumelo Mosaka, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Development Bank of South Africa, and also Professor Guy Midgley, who is the Director of School of Climate at Stellenbosch University. And after that, we also are going to have a panel discussion, which will be facilitated by Mr. Deshiken Naidu. And after that panel discussion, then we'll have discussions if time allows us. And we'll have a closing remarks from Commissioner Janse Rabi. Thank you very much, Ms. Boitumelo.
Your phone. Okay. Good morning, everyone. We are competing into, there's quite a bit of background noise, but yeah. Good morning, South Africa. Good morning. I just want to thank the PCC for the opportunity to be here today to start talking to the Just Adaptation and Resilience Investment Plan. I would firstly like to commend the work that the PCC has been doing, the release of the Climate Finance Landscape Report that was issued last week, and the powerful messaging from that report that 91% of climate finance in South Africa has been from the private sector. And this shows, an indication that, as South Africa, we have always been, ahead of the curve, if I could put it that way. And we started this journey many, many years ago, and I think sometimes it's always good to sit and reflect and really look at how we have, dealt with some of these challenges. I mean, when you look at when we started our REAP program, we created, it was a collaboration between government, private sector, development finance, institutions, the formation of the PCC, and the involvement of civil society, the involvement of academia as well. And this collaboration model as a country, we have really used well and have seen the benefits thereof. Now, when it comes to the Just Adaptation and Resilience Investment Plan, I think it's going to be critical for us to learn from the JET IP, that we have just released as well. And one thing that we need to be cautious of as a as a nation is not letting capital dictate what we do, but it's going to be critical that we actually look at what our needs are as a nation and actually devise the mechanisms. Once we have the plan clearly around that, then the capital will then follow. But the interest of South Africa and its and the multi-sector approach that we have to adopt has to be at the center of this plan that we are to develop. And, crafting an investment case for just adaptation and resilience involves, highlighting the economic, social, and environmental benefits that will come out of it. It also emphasizes the cost effectiveness of the preemptive measures compared to reactive responses to climate impacts. Such a case showcases a potential return on investment through increased community resilience, reduced disaster-related costs, and sustainable development. This illustrates the positive impact on vulnerable population to foster social equity. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. The opportunity is how to use climate finance to close SDG gaps, and aligning with SDGs, emphasizing long-term gains, can attract diverse stakeholders. This includes private investors, this includes philanthropy, to support a comprehensive, just adaptation strategy. I'd also like to highlight, I don't have much time, but we, at the Africa Investment Forum, a few months ago, we released a report on developing and funding African cities. What was clear from the report was firstly that by 2050, African cities are going to have 1.5 billion people living in them. As South Africa, as we draft this plan, it's gonna be important that we have our cities at the heart of it as well. We need to build smart, climate resilient cities. Our number one priority as a development finance institution is our cities, it's municipalities. And we support municipalities at all levels. We support municipalities with planning, with project preparation, with funding in the built environment and in maintenance as well. Therefore, integrating resilience into municipal infrastructure planning and investment is going to be a critical part of this journey. And I'm really looking forward to seeing, that chapter around our municipalities, because that is the basis in which we deliver services within the South African context. The second thing that I would like to see, that we are looking at in this space as well, is establishing water as an asset class. You all know we are currently in a challenging environment around water as a country. This, to improve the sector's resilience and attract private capital, is actually going to be crucial in this regard. The work we started a few years ago with the Green Climate Facility was a program that we developed for water reuse. And we recently secured $235 million US. 200 of that is actually going to go into projects, and $35 million US is actually going to go towards project preparation in this space as well. We are seeing this as a critical asset class, and even looking at having engagements with the pension funds as well, in them participating in these projects that are going to be developed. This is an initiative between ourselves, DWS and National Treasury as well. I just see with her standing here that I need to cut my story short. We are also establishing climate early warning systems for SADC. This work has commenced, and with DBSA as a GCF accredited entity for a project which will build the resilience of the entire SADC region by facilitating a paradigm shift towards investment in scarce water resources that are informed by high-quality climate information, early warning systems, and using innovative financing approach for climate resilience. I am looking forward to us having this discussion, and congratulations again to the PCC. I really do commend you for the great work that you are doing for our beautiful nation. Thank you.
In the interest of time, I will invite Professor Guy Medley to take the floor.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor to be here. Let me just get my presentation up and running. I hope that's working fine. As I say, great honor to be here, and congratulations to the PCC. And I really enjoyed your comments, Ms. Masaka. I think you're exactly on point, and you'll hear some of the words that you used in my presentation today. But I was asked to set the scene on the value of nature and the value of ecosystems, particularly for adaptation, resilience, and development. And I fully agree. Climate change adaptation and resilience building is a massive development opportunity, a sustainable development opportunity. So I come to you from the highlands of the Drakensberg, the water towers of South Africa, where I have working with a team to look at the ecosystems that support the water services that fund one of the biggest industrialized centers in South Africa. And we need a paradigm shift to really realize the value of these ecosystems and what they give us. Very quickly, to start off with the risk. I think we all know this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but this is from the IPCC recent report. Verified impacts of climate change on human and natural ecosystems in Africa, reported in the literature, verified, peer-reviewed, are extensive. And we now know a lot more about where these impacts are happening. We know that they're occurring all the way through Africa. All those pink and dark, more maroon colors represent attributed impacts that have happened in the past that we can attribute to climate change. So we know this is happening. The risks increase for Africa, and they relate to risks for ecosystems. You can see the diagram on the left here shows where we are, just over 1 degree warming. As we increase to 1.5 degrees, risks to biodiversity and ecosystem disruptions, which affect all our ecosystem services, human impacts, human health, and food security goes from a moderate risk to a high and very high risk quite quickly. And the financial way to read this diagram is to realize that these transitions imply massive increase in costs, massive increase in loss and damage costs. So that is really important for the finance folks to understand what this diagram really means. There are two investments we can make. We can invest in mitigation, which aims to bring down the level of warming. We all know about that. The other big investment is we can increase investment in adaptation, which helps to increase our resilience to higher levels of warming. We don't understand that nearly as much as the mitigation investments. Now, when you look at the analysis for Africa, it is quite amazing that looking at the NDCs, the national determined contributions, 66% of Africa's finance needs are thought to be or are recorded as mitigation needs, and only 24% adaptation needs. Colleagues, this cannot be right. It cannot be right. This is a result of inadequate research. Due to inadequate investment in research on adaptation, we know that we need much more money for adaptation implementation. That's very important. This is the report that I'm quoting from for these data, if you want to go and look at it. Gutierrez et al., Guzman et al., 2022. What's the situation? I agree fully with Ms. Musaka. A lot of this is about building resilience in cities. And the reason is that Africa and Southern Africa are the fastest urbanizing areas of the world. At the same time, our populations population growth rates are reducing. And so we're approaching an era of really potential sustainable development. And if we can land this combined set of factors, we can create a region and a continent which is highly resilient to climate change. But we have to take full use of the opportunity. We have to understand the adaptation needs in addition to the mitigation needs. The first impacts, the first confrontation that we've had with climate change has been really through extreme events. And we are learning fast how powerful and how damaging these extreme events are. And we will continue to have to learn from extreme events very, very fast. Here's a recent analysis. Africa's extreme weather killed 15,000 people this year, 4,000 people last year. A lot of the mortality occurred in Libya due to the extreme event in the Mediterranean. But this is the early warning systems. I fully agree. Early warning systems are going to be vital for understanding this. And we need a paradigm shift in financing in loss and damage. And that is, we need financing to support recovery and resilience building. But we have to engage in a deliberate process of learning by doing. This is an experiment that's running already, and we have to learn from it. And we have to develop the processes of learning what are the best practices as we develop resilience in our development processes. It's absolutely vital to build this into the financing. Otherwise, we're just going to be playing catch up. I'm nearly finished, but I wanted to cite this incredibly important paper, which looks at particularly cities and how it is so important to look at cities as a part of an entire ecosystem. We need to articulate economics with ecology in a very deliberate way. Cities can use nature-based solutions, the values of biodiversity and ecosystems, to help adapt to climate change in the cities through floodwater control, through urban heat island issues, in the coastal areas through protection against sea level rise, and in the peri-urban areas, getting a good connection with sustainable food and water resources. The value of ecosystems in generating a healthy urban environment is underappreciated and has to be completely integrated into our future urban planning, colleagues. We have a massive opportunity to do that. Africa is packed full of biodiversity, which is of great value to us, and we need to make use of it. There's also the last slide. We also face risks of doing the wrong things, and we really have to avoid this. This is one which, fortunately, we've been able to do enough research in Africa to fight against this trend of rampant investment in afforestation in the wrong places, planting the wrong trees in the wrong places. This is a mal-mitigation and a maladaptation funding, because you can show through the science, I won't go into it, that the mitigation benefits, the carbon benefits are minimal, but the impacts on human livelihoods, on grazing lands, on water resources, and on ecosystem integrity are devastating and will affect generations to come. Colleagues, we need the science. We need to understand the policy of how investment is implemented and affects our ecosystems. This is just one example of a paper we published from Southern Africa showing that the grasslands of the world, which underpin hundreds of millions of livelihoods, are at risk of mal-mitigation and maladaptation through inappropriate afforestation. And there's a lot of money chasing this. There's hundreds of millions of dollars being invested in this effort. We have to turn it around. We have had some successes so far.
Excellent, Guy. I know there's a lot more that you want to share, and we will share the entire presentation. But thank you for that really, really good scene-setting to both you and to Boitumelo. My jumbo, everyone. I just want to confuse our Tanzanian colleagues next door. We're now going to go into a discussion session, and the promise that I'm making to you is from the PCC's perspective. This is a conversation that we're going to carry into next year as one of the major pillars that we have to develop. We now have the privilege of having a really high-powered panel, so I'm going to ask Wanjira and Olympus to please make their way to the front. And we have Brian Mantlana talking to us from Pretoria, where I imagine the climate today is probably the same as Dubai, because Southern Africa is having a heat wave, so he's with us in many ways. Colleagues, a very quick introduction in addition to what you have heard already. We need to unpack a very critical concept. Earlier this week in the Africa Pavilion, the African Union launched the African Climate Security Risk Report. And it wouldn't surprise you that the major issue that we have to deal with immediately on the continent, as it is true in many parts of the world, is in fact adaptation, moving towards resilience. And this is precisely the concept that we want to engage. So, these are the rules of the operation. I'm going to introduce each speaker. You will start off with 4 minutes, because one of our speakers is now trapped in the negotiations because the texts were released last night, and I know we all want to get hold of it. So you have a little bit of extra time, but that little bit of extra time is 4 minutes. Please, let's be clear. I'm going to walk over there so that I can both listen to you better, look at you, and when I start walking back, that's the signal that you have to. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So we're going to start off with Brian in Pretoria. Brian, it's a concept that hasn't really hit the headlines yet, and its conceptualization is attractive, but our learnings from the JETP is that these investment plans are actually difficult because they run right into the conventional way of thinking about it. We'd like to first get your commentary from the perspective of where you sit as both the commissioner and the head of climate in one of the biggest research institutes in Africa, if not the biggest of all, the CSIR. Are we thinking about this in the right way?
Yes, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Desigan, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the invitation to contribute this morning. It's always nice to share a platform with Guy. Some of you may not know this, but Guy was my first boss when I came back to South Africa after my studies. Now, coming back to the issue at hand, Desigan. Firstly, I just like the sectors that are considered in the plan. Let's start there. Food security, water security, built environment. That set of sectors is an excellent choice. However, I think what we need to bear in mind with this plan that we are talking about this morning is that it brings to light 4 key aspects. One is adaptation, one is resilience, one is finance, the last one is development. How do we combine these 4 separate concepts into a single plan? What's going to be the focus? Is it going to be on adaptation? Is it going to be on resilience? Is it going to be on development? Is it going to be on finance? How do we strike that balance? Secondly, for me, the second point, I'm going to make 5 points. The second point I want to make is adaptation planning, not only in South Africa, but across the continent, has always been a standalone activity from development planning. I want to repeat that. Adaptation planning has always been done parallel to development planning. And I'm reminding us that process, and I've been part of that. I call it an era in my view. I've been part of that era for the past 2 decades also. And how is this plan going to overcome that? How does adaptation and development merge and be found in the same space? The third thing that I want to highlight about a plan like this that is being developed is that it's going to bring three issues to the surface. One, issues of power, whose voice are being heard, how are gender dimensions considered in the plan itself. The second one is alignment. We've always been doubting the level of alignment between water policies and agriculture policies in South Africa. How is this plan going to manage that dynamic? The third aspect is administrative tensions, is location between national versus local government. How is the plan thinking to manage the tensions there across these three themes? I don't call them sectors: food security, water security, and built environment. How do we make that tension between national and local be less tense? Another aspect about this plan is balancing between hard adaptation, hard infrastructure, and soft infrastructure. In South Africa, we are very good at soft infrastructure, drafting plans, drafting strategies, drafting policies. Translating that to hard infrastructure is what is needed. Hard infrastructure for adaptation, for climate resilience. So I hope this plan takes us across that, give us enough momentum across the inertia that's holding us in planning stage. And lastly, there's a just component to this work. And it brings to the front the question of who is this plan for? We can't just say it's for South Africa. That's not adequate. Who is it for? I heard cities. I do not know if it is for the cities, but that must be cleared up front. Who is informing the development of the plan? Those are the just aspects, just two that I've mentioned, that I think are important if this plan is going to have a just element in it. Who is it for? Who is informing its development? I'm going to leave it there, Desikan, for this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. I think you've got the right set of questions, and I like the way you phrase them so that they're a bit more of a problematic than just questions, and we're starting to converge into the right angle of discussion. I'm going to move immediately on to Olympus Bantata. Olympus is the climate finance chief. I'm not so good with titles. Of the Development Bank of Southern Africa, the big MDB in our part of the world. We think we own it, but it is Southern Africa, as we are reminded fairly often. Olympus, from a finance perspective, understanding that we have to respect the current architectures, is this concept going to find the right kind of resonance? What do we need to do to make sure that it does? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Desikan. I thought I would start here. I mean, the common thing you'd hear, especially from a financing point of view, in terms of barriers to financing adaptation, is the common three themes around uncertain returns and high perceived risks. And then second, you hear a lot about the lack of capacity in financing institutions, including counterparties, just in the way that the assessment and appraisal of this type of initiatives is concerned. And then thirdly, you would hear about the inadequate regulatory frameworks or policy frameworks that are necessary to facilitate this. And I think it is in this regard that DFIs, development finance institutions, are often seen as occupying a unique role in terms of how to respond to this. And firstly is because, most of your, development banks would either be wholly or partly owned by government, and therefore the assumption would be that there should be a possibility purely based on proximity to influence policy and regulatory direction. And, the second thing is that, your DFIs in the main would mainly have experience around co-financing with private sector. Therefore, the understanding of your kind of risk-return profiles that are expected from a private sector point of view would assume to be understood, and therefore putting DFIs in a better place to hopefully, crowd in, private investment. But I think what is key for me is where we stand is really that ability to build and demonstrate robust business cases for investing in climate adaptation and resilience. And this requires a shift, even from a DFI and generally from financing institutions' point of view, in as much as how this is done. And there are three key things for me, is really the understanding around the physical climate risk assessment to enable a systemic identification of opportunities within this area. And the other thing is really the understanding from an investor point of view of the metrics of adaptation resilience from a measure and demonstration of benefits point of view. I think that is quite key. And then, of course, this nicely leads into capital mobilization approaches where you start looking at awareness around, the right business models, the financial structures that needs to be in place to be able to respond to this. And I think for us from a DBSA point of view, we think the approach of starting to look at this thing earlier on in the development of projects, especially at project preparation stage, allow you to inculcate all these things to ensure that your resultant infrastructure plans or investment are already positioned to not only allow the DFIs to participate, but to crowd in private investment. I think, and I think that is quite key. But I think, as my CEO illustrated earlier, for us we do that even earlier because where we work with municipalities around planning for the IDPs that results in infrastructure plans, the lot of emphasis that we are having now is to ensure that at that early stage, we ensure that that becomes evident. So in actual fact, we go to an extent of ensuring that you have the right frameworks in place from a resilience point of view, how you inculcate nature-based and even biodiversity into those plans to make sure that the development of those plans is really in the right direction. And I think that is quite key. And lastly, the thing that I wanted to mention is just the importance of partnerships. And for me, partnerships here takes lots of directions, but specifically I'm referring to, like our partnerships with funding partners like your GEF and GCF. I mentioned earlier the work that we are doing with municipalities. With the GEF right now, we are working with municipalities to put those plans in place to ensure that the frameworks are in place for municipalities. And I think my CEO earlier mentioned the water reuse side and the project preparation facility that we have in place to ensure exactly what I mentioned earlier. So that's really the approach that we are taking, and I think is the correct one. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Olympus. You got the extra 30 seconds because you were dovetailing the segue into the next speaker. Thank you very much for that. Colleagues, we have the privilege, the benefit of having with us Wanjira Matai, who has many hats, as you would well know. And she's allowed to wear all of those hats today. But the one that particularly lured us into this discussion is this thing about organizing a concept that's going to serve way beyond single countries to whole regions and eventually the globe. I think starting off with the developing world, because this is our priority. So Wanjira, in your various roles, including the one around being in charge of Africa and global partnerships at the WRI, what is your response to this concept? Does it have potential?
Absolutely. First of all, it's wonderful to be here. This is a beautiful pavilion, so South Africa, yay. It absolutely does. You know, as we follow, as many of us are following the action track, but also one ear to the negotiations and trying to figure them out and what's coming out, what's in it for us. I'm at once frustrated but inspired, and frustrated because the agenda on adaptation is just not moving. We're hearing very little coming out, and even when there are announcements, and there are many, several of them have old money. You know, you sit down and people are like, is this a new announcement? Is this an old announcement? What is it? And a part of that has just inspired me to think about the agenda that started to emerge at the Africa Climate Summit. The reality that Africa has such great potential to build not only on the confluence of three issues that are happening at the same time, which is the best solar potential in the world, an abundance of critical minerals, an abundance of renewable energy, the fastest growing workforce in the world, but that actually our reality ought to be different, and that we ought to think about what are the real opportunities there to unlock lasting resilience, so that it's not a matter of charity for the African continent. It's actually a matter of unleashing the great potential that we have. And we have a generation of young people and a generation of Africans today and people living in Africa who are called absolute Africans, because they are the ones who have left wherever they are to come to the continent. But there is an opportunity here to build lasting resilience that is not built on the edge. I often say that you cannot adapt against poverty. It doesn't matter what you do. The sort of extremes we are facing, the sort of extremes that are expected if we are on this trajectory, the fossil fuel emissions that are almost guaranteed to push us to greater and greater risk, cannot be built on the edge of poverty or in poverty. So we have to build economic muscle. And that's what I think is absolutely exciting about the emerging realities of the critical mineral sector, the emerging realities of an agricultural value chain that doesn't play on the commodities side, that begins to play higher up the value chain. We are looking at certain commodities and value chains that are very exciting. I always think a commodity like bauxite, Sierra Leone and some of the hills of Guinea producing some of the best bauxite raw material. And they literally ship out raw materials worth, I'm hearing, $7 billion. But the bauxite value chain at a higher end is worth $11 trillion. So to play in the commodity side is to limit the ability to actually build resilience, build wealth, create jobs, lasting jobs, quality jobs, by actually investing in resources that we have. So I'm really inspired about lasting resilience, just transition, that has to do with inclusive trade, that has to do with fair and equal access to finance, markets, technology. We know that of the entire billions spent on renewable energy, in particular on solar investments worldwide, only 3% are invested in the solar belt. Finance simply not flowing where the sun shines. So all of that is really, for me, where lasting resilience for us will come. And I'm digging in to the inclusive trade sector, because in addition to all we have to do with concessional finance and with adaptation and climate finance, we have got to unleash the potential of Africa's great economic growth.
Wanjira, that is just brilliant. That is just brilliant. I know in one of the discussions that happened last evening, and Makamba was on the panel, there was a reminder that this economic giant in Europe right now had its birth on the back of debt forgiveness and gigantic global subsidies to shore up those economies. We need to find those mechanisms to shore up the potential in Africa, and not just for Africa. Because an Africa that succeeds means a world that succeeds. And an Africa that fails means that a world that fails. Colleagues, we actually have a few minutes. I rushed you a bit so that we could create the chance for at least 2 or 3 comments or questions from the audience before I ask the panel to close up. Please use the opportunity right now. We've got 1, we've got 2, we've got 3, and we've got 4. And the person with the mic, your memory looks like it's going to be better than mine, so just remember who those folk are.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the contribution. My name is Mzila Mtenjane, and I'm the CEO for the Minerals Council. In the presentation, the issue of water and agriculture has come up quite a bit, and both of those are for use of land. But what we've also been seeing is increasing conflict with access to minerals. And it's also important that we mention that, you know, as we talk about adaptation and those natural resources, that minerals are also critical to our ability to mitigate against climate change. I'm not hearing how we actually managing that complexity in terms of that conflict that's arising, and as far as the land use amongst all of these natural resources, because they're all critical for our sustainability. But the emphasis in the conversations that I've been participating in seem to have been more on the above ground and not taking into consideration the below ground resources that are also needed. Maybe just a comment on that. Thank you.
I think just walk from the back here.
Hi, my name is Claire from Green Cape. I want to speak a little bit about the concessionality of finance that we're actually seeing. So I think the Presidential Climate Commission report was recently mentioned, and a large proportion is private sector financed debt, relatively expensive. And we're seeing in the JET IP, you know, the investment plan is also that so-called concessional debt is actually, when you convert it to local currency, is quite expensive again. And when we're thinking about the business case for adaptation, you know, mitigation is relatively easy in a sense. Like, where do you actually see those investments and business cases being made when the existing finance that's available, that's so-called concessional, is really, really not? And it's, in my mind at least, quite expensive. What is going to really shift the mark to actually getting funding into those projects that are desperately needed? Thanks.
Thank you. Right. Yes, please. You understand up.
Hi, my name is Uno Ntlemgadi. I am from South Africa. I'm not sure if I actually have my question figured out, but I think I'm touched by a point that was raised around the need to drive economic, you know, that people can adapt around poverty. And mine is to understand if, I worry if we actually, the people who have powers, particularly around the government, if they care, and maybe if we shouldn't start by ensuring that the implementers of these big plans are connected to the issues that we have. So I think I speak because I am on the ground, and I am just realizing the disconnection even within the different governments that we speak about. So I think there's an important role of capacity building that needs to happen if we really want to see these plans going forward, because we are disconnected to the mandate of the higher powers.
Can you hear me? Okay. This is Lamise Umarji from News 24. The African group of negotiators are really pushing for the global goal on adaptation framework to be adopted at this COP, and saying, like, if it's not, this COP will have failed. You know, just because it holds so much, it can unlock finance needed for adaptation. So I just want to understand, is that how you, maybe the DBSA can comment, is that really how you are perceiving it? How crucial is this global goal on adaptation to move forward with projects? DBSA or anyone else who wants to comment? Yeah.
Thank you. Last one, and we'll get back to the panel.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Buitumelo Mulete from the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. I would just like to pose a question in relation to this glorified private partnerships that we've been hearing throughout this panel. Is it that there is no capability in the state, that the state has no interest in actually pushing for these projects? I mean, in my understanding, the purpose of the DBSA is also simultaneously to push developmental goals of the state. And there's no mention of people, there's no mention of workers, there's no mention of collaboration outside of this private public partnership, which is basically business and government. So at this stage, where are the people and how do we incorporate the developmental needs of the people? And how do we make sure that this is an integrated approach in ensuring that adaptation is actually addressed in a way that will be just and in a way that will be inclusive? Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed. Colleagues on the panel, I'm going to, of course, ask you to do something impossible. So you have 2 minutes, and in those 2 minutes, respond to what you want to and offer your closing remark, please. And we'll go in the same sequence as we started. So Brian, we'll start with you.
No, thanks. I'm going to start with Zila's comment about minerals. The scope of this plan is focused. It does not include, well, let me be positive. It includes just 3 aspects: water, infrastructure, what was the third one? There are 3 aspects to it. I just missed the third one now. So it does not include everything. I think that's a strength of it. That's good that it's focused. But I hear your point about minerals and the role they play as a component of responding to climate change, and that needs to be considered, but it's not within the scope of this plan. Now, secondly, the question on GGA, Global Goal of Adaptation. I think the key point that I'll just leave with you is that the AGN's view has found a lot of resistance over time. Just to remind you that in 2013, the AGN was the first coalition that put forward the position of GGA, and that has been diluted over the past 7 years to what it is now, which is mostly a framework and there's no direct link with funding. So I'm curious to see what's going to come out of this COP with GGA, but I'm not holding my breath because of the asymmetries in power that I play in the process that you guys are participating in. Lastly, on Boitumelo's point about people, it's part of what I said earlier, Boitumelo, that this plan that we are talking about this morning, it has got a just component to it. And the question is, how does the human dimension feature? Who is it for? And how are aspects beyond business included in it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brian, Olympus, can we go to you?
I'm going to try to use the time just to address 2 issues. And if time allows, I'll go to the next. But I thought I would talk to the concessionality issue and the issue of emphasis around private sector involvement. The concessionality issue is very real, and I think for us, from a DBSA point of view, we have had first-hand, experience where that is concerned, and it's really related to, the funds that we receive in dollars and trying to implement in local currency, and the efforts of trying to manage the currency risk very significantly diluting whatever concessionality you receive, and therefore ending up with just, the funds not able to achieve what you thought you would achieve. But I think what has been helpful on our side is that we have been pushing very hard to change that around. Actually, in the last approval we have had from the GCF, they have actually taken up currency risk. And the way that they've done that was to set money aside that we can, when we request disbursement, be able to tap into that to deal with any losses that are due to currency risk. So And the other thing that is happening is that there's serious thinking around local currency financing. Actually, they've approached us to say they would want to work with the DBSA as, just to go through a pilot of using local currency financing. So it's a very real, situation, but we hope we'll find a solution where that is concerned. The other question was around why the emphasis around private sector, private finance. I think really the logic there is to say public finance alone would not be sufficient to move the needle where, climate issues are concerned, and significant amount of capital is sitting with private sector. And the next question is to say, what is the most efficient use of the limited private sector or public sector resources? And we see it as designing instruments that allow you to pull in or crowd in private investment in the work that we do. But it doesn't in any way mean that in your project preparation or development stage, you do not involve a wide range of stakeholders. In actual fact, I don't think you can be able to do proper adaptation without people. I think you'll be wasting your time. It's really based with people in the first place. Thank you.
Excellent.
Is it me or is this okay? There we are. I completely agree with the point that you made, particularly on adaptation and the fact that the cost of capital, issues of access to finance. I actually think we're on the verge of winning the push for a re-evaluation of the global finance architecture, the injustice in how it's structured, why it's even the way it still is unfit for purpose, and the fact that local finance has not been flowing. I found this statistic quite interesting recently, that 1%, that African pension funds are largely invested in US Treasury bonds. And so the idea that 1% of African pension funds is equivalent to $60 billion, just imagine for a minute if those pension funds had an Africa desk that looked inward rather than outward, that there are real opportunities to be had and to be seen for real finance to be mobilized. And that needs to be an African investment, an evaluation of our own investment opportunities locally. On the global goal on adaptation, we absolutely need a global goal. I mean, we cannot galvanize, as you've seen for many years now, adaptations left behind. The net zero goal has become such an important metric on the mitigation side, and there's hardly anything on adaptation. So it is crucially important. I must underscore the fact that livelihoods is one of the themes that is being explored in the global goal, because you cannot, again, adapt if you do not lift people out of poverty and address this direct issue of livelihood. So I hope when it comes out, everybody will be looking for the jobs implication of the global goal on adaptation, that there needs to be a very clear focus on that. And then I guess on the critical minerals, has to be. The critical minerals is a really big part of what was anchored in the Africa Climate Summit, acknowledging the fact that we have green manufacturing, yes, and the opportunity for green manufacturing to happen on the African continent. Renewable energy resources, my own country, Kenya, has close to 90% renewable energy grid. A green grid doesn't mean that everyone has access to electricity, but if we could get a grid that is functional, then we would have access to green energy. And here's the irony. We have a green grid, almost 90%, but only 30% access. So only 30% of Kenyans have access to electricity. Why? Because the grid is limited. You have a limited grid, you can't supply everybody, and so the limited electricity available is very expensive. And because it's expensive, 70% of the income to the utility company comes from 5% of the users. It is an unprofitable business to be in, yet you have a green grid. That's why productive use, manufacturing, will be the real opportunity to expand so that there's real demand. No country, I'm told, anywhere has expanded access to energy for domestic use by addressing domestic access directly. It's all a collateral benefit of productive use. So we have to look at productive use, and the real opportunities are in the critical minerals, but also in green manufacturing. And I wanted to add one last thing, the reality that part of the opportunity in Africa is a decarbonization one. Commodities exports are 30% higher in carbon emissions. If you were to process bauxite in Sierra Leone, even partially, you reduce emissions from a raw material rock to something more processed by 30%.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And just before I hand over for the closure, I just want to address this GGA a little bit more directly. Here's the bottom line. There is a limited expectation about what's going to come out of the hallowed halls of B1. We want to be optimistic, but we also have to be realistic. What we are determined to do is that we want to drive, firstly, an Africa-centered, but then a global process around making this concept of a just adaptation and resilience investment plan stick. And this is the tool that we're going to use to hold the next COP accountable to actually giving us the GGA that we need. Panel, thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to hand over to Jan Sarabi, one of the commissioners in the PCC, to do a wrap-up, sir.
I'm not sure whether the applause is for Desigan or for me. If it's for me, I'd like another round of applause, everybody. But I think a wrap-up of a difficult topic and a complicated topic like that is pretty much impossible. But I do want to thank, on behalf of the PCC, all the panel members and the participants in this morning's event, as well as all the guests, for the important contributions from that too. I think what Boitumelo said about capital following planning, I think, was vitally important in the discussion. We need to keep that in mind in everything that we do, is that our planning needs to be in place the way it should be for those capital flows to actually happen. And I'm going to be summarizing very shortly. So, Professor Midgley, I think your point about learning while doing is equally important, and one that certainly resonates with everything we say and do in the Presidential Climate Commission. I think the alignment made by Brian Mantlana about how we merge developmental and developmental and adaptation planning is equally valid. Olympus's point about the justness, I think, resonated, and especially this issue about robust business plans and business cases for adaptation, certainly one that bears thinking about and expanding upon more. I think in conclusion, and just again, I need to thank the National Business Initiative or Business Initiative and the hosts of these events profusely for the professional way that it's been done, and for hosting stimulating and topical conversations. I want to close off by reiterating or reminding something which a very famous African related to one of our panel members this morning also said, was about this issue of when we plant seeds. You know, this is what we're doing. This is what we do at these events and in the discussions that we have. And we're not only planting the seeds for peace, we're planting the seeds for peace, justice, and prosperity. With that, I'd like to thank the participants, the NBI, and everybody involved today, and especially our guests in this event. Thank you, everybody.